On behalf of the Canadian International Council, welcome to this event in honor of International Women's Day. My name is Valerie Bashinsky. I'm on the Halifax branch. I'm on the executive of the Halifax branch of CIC, and we are an organization with branches across the country. Essentially, we try and organize events, these days online, and other times in person, to discuss and help people understand what's going on in international affairs. And we hope to have some in-person events soon where people can actually meet others who have the same kinds of interests. Christine Yang, thank you for arranging for today's panelists who have a wealth of information and experience in government, in the private sector, in non-government organizations, and in the academic world. Christine and others have circulated bios, so I hope you will understand I'm not going to read all of those bios, but in fact, try to introduce people rather, try and give you a Coles Notes versions of their background, and then we'll ask them to give a bit of information about their organizations and their current jobs, and then we have a series of questions that we hope will be interesting to you. I'll start with Laura Markle, who's had a very interesting career and experience with government, with working for a prime minister, the British High Commission, an organization called Right to Play in China, and for Huawei, Canada, and now is the director of the Canada-China Business Council at the Atlantic chapter in Halifax. Nicole Johnson is now the president and CEO of Edunova. I'll let her explain to those of you who don't know Edunova what that is and what her role is there. Nicole has a lot of experience in both federal and provincial governments in international trade, and she's recently been appointed Associate Deputy Minister for the Nova Scotia Department of Labor and Advanced Education, and will take up that, I believe, in the new fiscal year. Dr. Whitman is the Executive Director of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security, and she's been there for some time and has really built that organization and developed international agreements and policies for the protection of children. Dr. Whitman has also worked for various NGOs, including UNICEF in New York, and has an academic career and has taught at Dalhousie, St. Mary's, and the University of Botswana. So that's the short version of their experience, but I think you'll hear more about them. So maybe we could start with you, Laura, and give us an idea of what you're doing as the Canada-China Business Council.
Well, thank you very much, Valerie, for that very warm welcome, and to the CIC Halifax chapter for inviting me to celebrate International Women's Day and to join these very inspiring women to talk about international work. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion, and I hope our experiences will encourage students listening to get excited about the possibilities in this field. The CCBC is a leading bilateral organization that's been in operation for over 42 years, with 5 chapters across Canada and 2 in China, Beijing and Shanghai. Our team works to support our members with advice on regulatory issues, logistics, strategic planning, and ongoing updates and guidance on doing business in China and Chinese businesses interested in investing in Canada. The Atlantic chapter was first established in May of 2019, and I took on the role as director a few months later in September. It's surreal when I look back, Valerie, at those beginning days when we could meet in person. You remember those? In those first few months of that job, I was traveling extensively across the Atlantic region, meeting business people and hosting official launch events to mark the establishment of the new chapter. My last trip to China was in October 2019, and then, well, we all know what happened next. Fast forward to almost 1 year ago to this day, we all faced a lockdown. I remember as a team, we had to reassess our value to our members, given our usual norm of meeting face-to-face and traveling to China would be put on hold. We had to pivot quickly, and we sure did. We started online content that would offer members and potential members updates, briefings, and training courses on Chinese business culture. We've also hosted masterclass series and a roadshow geared toward helping small and medium enterprises, which there are many in the Atlantic, to jump into the China market. In fact, we are currently hosting our first ever virtual women's trade mission to China, and I'm pleased to say that we have 4 very impressive women on that mission who are based here in the Atlantic region.
Nicole, do you want to tell us about what you actually do at Edunova?
Yes, thank you, Valerie. And before I get started, I want to take the moment to say Happy International Women's Day to all the women that are on this panel. I know we stand among giants here today. All the women that are joining us from across the province or from wherever else, and also to all the allies. I know that there's a lot of allies that are men that help to support the work that women do. So I want to recognize that as well. And certainly a big thanks to CIC for inviting us to this amazing panel to just really share our thoughts. So I am the president and CEO of Edunova. Edunova is Nova Scotia's association of universities and language schools and K-12 schools, all part of that whole collaborative engine that works to support international education. Essentially, Edunova is at the forefront of the workforce initiatives in Nova Scotia. So what we help to do is to support bringing international students that are a huge part of Nova Scotia's economy, that help to support them when they're in universities through programs like our Study and Stay, that help to support the retention of those students who are interested in staying in the province once they've graduated. Effectively, we helped to support just in 2018, 527 million to the Nova Scotia economy. So we are working very closely in collaboration with all the universities, with the provincial and federal government, and also with all our students, really trying to help them to understand what their opportunities might look like in Nova Scotia, helping them through those really hurdles in terms of how do you stay in the province after you've graduated. And we know that we've seen over 1,000 international students that chose to stay in Nova Scotia just last year during the middle of a pandemic. So, you know, it's wonderful to see there's so much passion in our students that are looking to stay here. And it really is interesting for me as a leader to know that we are helping to contribute to moving that needle in terms of really building for future generations. And as Valerie mentioned, I have also just been appointed Associate Deputy Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. So while I'm doing the work right now with students in one capacity, when that new role takes over, which will be as of the 29th of this month, I will also still be able to continue helping our students, but in a very different capacity and helping all of Nova Scotia. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to share that.
Dr. Widman.
Thank you very much also to CIC for inviting me here today. And yes, happy International Women's Day to everyone. I am pleased to share this platform with all of you, but also just to have an opportunity to continue to get to know some extraordinary work of some of the other panelists and colleagues here. And I look forward to, I hope, further engagement post this event. So I want to just explain a little bit about what I do as the Executive Director of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security. It is an organization that is based at Dalhousie University. We work globally, and our vision and mission is to try to ensure that children are no longer recruited and used in violence or in armed conflicts around the world. And this year, being the 10th year, well, in 2020 was the 10th year of us celebrating our existence at Dalhousie University, was where we moved from being the Romeo Dallaire Child Soldiers Initiative to becoming the Dallaire Institute. This has meant that Dalhousie is now really behind the work that we are doing, and I'm hopeful that one day we are going to be seen as on par with the Oceans Institute as one of the preeminent areas of Dalhousie to help promote this very work that we are doing around the world. I currently oversee staff members here in Canada, as well as an office in Juba, South Sudan, and another in Kigali, Rwanda. And we've got other liaison officers in places such as Kinshasa, Mogadishu, Somalia, and various other people that are consultants and trainers around the globe. And in fact, last week, we just signed a memorandum of understanding with Uruguay to create a center of excellence in Latin America. Just very quickly for people to understand, there are a few pieces to our work where we conduct research and we look at gaps in knowledge and how we can better understand how to prevent the recruitment and use of children. We also conduct high-level advocacy. So we do a lot of work with governments at the level of our government, but at the level of governments that we collaborate with around the globe. And we also do a lot of work at the level of the United Nations, NATO, African Union, and other multilateral organizations to help improve policy and change. And then there's programming that we do that is with improving security sector interactions with children in armed conflict. So we train military and police around the world to be able to do their jobs better, to help protect the children that are in the zones that they may interact with them, but also to protect themselves. And we focus a lot as well on mental health and moral injury of the soldiers and the police that we interact with. And then the last piece is community education. So we also believe that it's important to have systems where we have communities also helping to protect children. And so we work with women's groups in places like South Sudan. We conduct radio programming in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we have been doing things like peace education clubs. So a wide variety of programming to approach different areas of interest for us all around the globe. And then just to add on, I then do still teach at Dalhousie in the summertime. I tend to do one course and I do some supervision as well. So a multitasker of many sorts, but it keeps life interesting. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, so to go from now to the beginning for all of you, and I said earlier when we were speaking that things are very different now for young people, but it still might be interesting to ask each of you to think about or to speak about how you got started in this kind of international affairs world. And Laura seemed to think she had something to share that wasn't necessarily time limited.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, I guess we'll see if that idea flies with our audience, but I'll give it a shot. So yeah, where did I get started? I think my first experience with becoming curious about other cultures was when I was in grade school. I attended a Francophone school in Kitchener, my hometown, Ontario. This was the start of a growing curiosity to put myself in other people's shoes, and my interest in knowing more about the world beyond Canada's borders. Fast forward to 1993, when I was finishing my degree in international relations at the University of Ottawa, I wanted to explore the world of politics and I decided to volunteer at the Liberal Party headquarters to help support Mr. Chrétien's election campaign. The great news is that the Liberals won a majority and they needed to staff the offices of the new governing Liberal Party. The network I developed over those months led me to the first professional interview of my professional career, to work as an assistant in the Prime Minister's press office. I'll never forget the sense of jubilation I felt when I got that call that I'd landed a job. I was starting out at the bottom of the top. When I reflect back, I know that both my hard work as a volunteer and my bilingualism are what got me there. And I guess, Valerie, that's the 2 points that I want to make about volunteerism and putting in some extra effort to make that network, especially when you're young. I would like to believe that's still important, especially in politics. And bilingualism, this is a bilingual country. And if you really want to succeed in Ottawa, being bilingual is almost, it's a no-go. You can't not be bilingual and want to have a hope of being in the federal government. So those are my ideas.
Okay, great. Well, I guess we'll keep the same order. Nicole, do you want to tell us what your beginnings were like?
Sure, sure. I think mine is a little different because I was not born in Canada. So I really got my first exposure to international work when I was on a scholarship, studying to do my BSc. And similarly to the experience that was just shared, volunteerism was really a big part of it for me. So I actually had an opportunity when I was in university because I really was not sure in terms of what I wanted to do. And I got the opportunity to help to support projects that were being considered by some of my lecturers around IFIs, so which is international financial institutions that would often have large funding opportunities that were being pursued. And I just jumped at the opportunity mostly because of the fact that I was, like I said, feeling very unsure about where I wanted to go, and just really got into it that way and started looking to see how this type of work could intersect in terms of whatever my future would look like. Subsequent to that, I got out of university and was really unsure as to what I should do, like what areas I can pursue. And I was having a challenge in finding a job. And collectively with a couple of friends, we decided if we couldn't find a job, why not start one for ourselves? So essentially, we became first-time entrepreneurs, just stumbling over our feet every day as we try to figure things out. But that experience that I'd gotten through volunteering and learning about how to write proposals and how to write IFIs and so forth was extremely valuable, because quite a number of people that I had worked with previously I built up those networks, and they started coming to us to get some understanding as to how to actually sending proposals for big funding opportunities. So that was really how I got started. And I'm proud to say that business that I started with my girlfriends years ago still exists. Actually, I sold my role in the business after 6 years of doing that, and my girlfriend is still in Portsmouth, UK, still doing that business and has grown it. Before I left, one of the things that we did was to start supporting students in terms of getting job placements. So we were sort of like branched out a little bit in terms of how we could support. And she continues to do that business to today. So whenever I get the chance to travel again, I'll have to stop by and make sure that I see how she is continuing to care for her baby.
Dr. Whitman, do you have something you want to share?
I'll try not to talk too long because it could be a long story, but I guess I would like to reinforce a couple of things that have been said. Is that certainly I think it's always really important for people to understand the kinds of issues in areas that give them joy and that certainly you have an interest in. So whenever you're thinking about your things such as an international career, like those of us that are here, I can say that the passion for the work is so important because the frustrations exist on a regular basis, not just during COVID. So you have to make sure you understand that dynamic. And so if I think back to my earlier years, whether it was through my undergraduate to my master's and PhD, and then the work that I did at the United Nations, and then on to my first job in Africa, where I ended up living in Botswana for 7 years and traveled around the continent. That through all of that, it was always really important to have a sense of curiosity, to want to continue to learn. And I do feel maybe as this year I'm turning 50, and I have got some experience now in supervising staff and working with a lot of students over the years. It is important to be humble and to always want to be able to learn from others, especially cultural contexts, and to put yourself out there, to be willing to break down anything that you think you know. You probably don't. There's probably somebody who can teach you far more than you know. And I would say getting out there, the networking piece that Laura talked about, that was always a really important part for me, was that anytime there was an event or an opportunity things such as this with CIC, I was always out there because it could always be an opportunity to learn, but also to meet somebody. And those connections and building strong relationships with the people you work with. Today, some of the relationships from the very first jobs I ever had are still relationships that help me to network through some of the problems or new partnerships. So yeah, I guess that's the kind of things I would want to convey to people.
Great. Well, it occurs to me that, and I worked for international trade, foreign affairs and international trade, and I can't remember how many times people would say, oh, that sounds so great. And I'd have to say, well, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. So to give people a real world, and people may think you're all in very glamorous jobs that involve international travel, to give people a bit of a real world perspective on what it is you do, maybe you could speak about what is the most difficult part of your job. I mean, Shelley gave us some sense of it isn't always glamorous, but now I'm asking, what is the most difficult thing you have to deal with? Should we go in the same order?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good, Valerie. Yeah, I had just sort of thought about, my current job, but I think it's Shelley's made me think, and Valerie, what you've just said, if you look over the span of my career and all the jobs that I've held, and I know Nicole and Valerie, you both worked at GAC. I was a spokesperson in crisis communications in foreign affairs for about 2 years. And it's in that time, there were about 6 of us handling all the issues of the world 24/7. We were on call 24/7. In that time that I was there was the Japan earthquake, the Haiti earthquake, many consular cases, many flights that had crashed, and we were on the hot seat. And you can be exhausted. You can be on call all night long and never get sleep. But you knew at the heart of it, what I was so proud of is I was representing this fabulous country, and I was on the line with media around the world answering on behalf of our fabulous diplomatic corps around the world. I was so proud of that, but more importantly, I think it's that team that comes together. You just can't even believe that, in a crisis like that, within a day, if someone's just started on the team, you feel like you've known them for a year. It's quite something. So yes, there's a lot of gifts. Like Shelley said, I have friends in all these jobs, right back to the Prime Minister, Mr. Kretschmer's fabulous office. There's so many of us that are very close to this day. And because you're just in it, and you're in the thick of it, and you're all so committed, and you love what you do, and you love this country called Canada. So I've gone on a little bit, but I hope it just reflects the passion that you have to have, as Shelley said, because sometimes you got to dig in and there's no choice. So that's where I'm at with that.
Great. Nicole?
So I think I looked at this in terms of what has been the most difficult part of my work in terms of what it is that I do now. But I also feel that it's very reflective of many of the roles I've held previously. So I think what I consider the most difficult part is not being able to divorce myself from internalizing the cost, whether it's the cost to my colleagues, whether it's the cost to my staff, the cost to external stakeholders. There's a lot of that you carry around. And, I really echo some of what I've heard from both Shelley and from Laura, because, having as well been involved in some of the work around Global Affairs Canada, and being at a post abroad, and having to talk to families when someone unfortunately might have passed, or you're unable to find someone's, relative because they happen to be in an unfortunate situation in a country somewhere around the world. That is hard. And it's hard not to internalize that and take that with you throughout your career. And I look at it also now in terms of just how difficult it is with having to navigate through the pandemic and having to be much more than the type of leader than you probably envisioned yourself to be. I mean, I have been joking with everyone that lately I have done so much of counseling that I suspect I might have a career in this at some point, because I feel like there's so much of that has now become part of your mainframe as a leader that you might not have necessarily had to have leveraged as much in the past, because there's so much of issues around, struggles that people are facing, whether it's mental health, whether it's issues around isolation and uncertainty. And sometimes it's hard not having the answers, because there's so much you can do and know more. And I think one of the things, while that's really difficult, what I've learned over the course of my career, and really thanks to some of the amazing mentors I've had throughout my career, who've always reminded me to always try to step back and see that 360 in terms of what are the things that you can control, what are literally within your capacity to actually make a difference about, versus those things that you can lend an ear and be empathetic towards, but not necessarily, understanding that you can't hold someone's hand the entire way. And that's often really hard across any of my careers that I've had. And I think just learning the lessons that I've learned from my mentors have been very valuable. And I try to dig deep when it is that I feel that I'm hearing from staff or from colleagues that are going through it right now in the middle of COVID, to remember some of those lessons that I've learned, to, try to remember that you cannot solve every single problem, and that's often hard, but it's worthwhile to remember.
Right. Dr. Widman.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I would just maybe highlight two, although I could highlight more. I think one of the hardest parts I have often found is people not caring. So you are passionate about this and you believe in the work that you're doing, and you see it when you are out there traveling, and you know it's important. And then you're trying to convey that back, whether that's to Global Affairs Canada, whether that's to philanthropic donors, whether that's to media or whoever it might be. And so, that is a difficult part, because it's not always easy to convey it in a nice packaged, neat way in a world where people are reduced down to shorter attention spans. And so I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is kind of building off of what Nicole was saying, is self-doubt. And I've always believed that action with good intentions is better than no action at all. And so it is always, though, a challenge, especially, today is International Women's Day. I do believe that, especially in leadership positions, there are a lot of women who question their abilities and have self-doubt, especially when you're in male-dominated arenas in leadership. And that it's important that we support each other in that. And just quickly to say that self-doubt also comes from, one of the things about the international travel, Valerie, and things that you mentioned is, I think there are different expectations, at least that I have held over my career. Hopefully it'll be different for younger women that are coming through, about whether or not all the roles that I'm fulfilling in my life, whether it's my children, my family, or my career, whether or not I am doing all of those to the best of my ability, and instead being happy with the fact that I'm doing the best that I can, that any individual could, in being able to do all of those roles, and to be more confident in that. I think that's been a learning area.
Right. Well, that suggests the next question, which is, and it is International Women's Day, are there any particular challenges that you have faced as a woman throughout your career? And you don't have to just say yes or no, you can tell us.
Well, I guess I'll kick off. Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Well, I think one that I think we can all relate to is that women tend to be underestimated. And I've often said that maybe that's not always a bad thing, but I will share a woman power moment with everyone. I was a competitive runner in high school and university. And that's where I really learned the importance of being a team player and becoming comfortable with competition. I remember on one official trip with the Prime Minister of the G7 summit in Birmingham, I wanted to get a run on one of my breaks, and I knew the Prime Minister's security detail were also going to take a break. So I thought I'd ask if I could join them. Of course, they were all men at that time. Grudgingly, they said, yeah, sure, but I think they assumed, or they were worried that I would slow them down. It was a humbling moment for them, as I found the pace needed a bit more tempo and ended up leading the pack. It was even more gratifying when they asked me to join them again, wanting tips on how to pace at certain distances. So I would say that's another whole other world that I learned a lot from, was being competitive and being an athlete. And so often you make an assumption if you see a man, they think, oh, they know athletics, they know how to be tough in a competition. But I learned so much about being a strong team player and also being comfortable with competition, and they don't have to cancel each other out. And anyway, so that was kind of for me an aha moment. I don't know if young women at this stage still go through those things, but it was pretty common back then.
Nicole?
So I think I would like to share a little bit in terms of what I consider the real intersectionalities around the challenges that I face. So I think for me, very often, my challenges are so interwoven, as I know many, if it is for many women, but mine are often being a woman who happens to be Black, being a woman who happens to be Black and an immigrant, and also a woman who happens to be a very proud Nova Scotian. It's often not necessarily seen as being fully compatible. I think there's often issues around people considering that the positions that I have managed to move into, I have gotten because of one of those intersectionalities. And that in itself has often been extremely hard, because at the end of the day, I know within myself just how hard I'm working for things. And I know that this is something that I've heard from so many women that happen to be visible minorities, or happen to be women who are disabled, or women who are part of the LGBTQIA community, that are really talking about what their intersectionalities have meant in terms of how they're viewed. And it's not an easy thing for people to devalue your experience and your competences based on whatever perceptions they would like to have of you from a social lens. And that in itself has been for me a real driver. I have reminded myself, whenever I figure out what are the biggest difficulties that I've had, I'm reminded by a conversation I had with my great-grandmother, who I just loved as a kid growing up. And she reminded me when I was a child, and we talked about it, and I think I was the first girl, so I have two older sisters. I was the only girl that did not speak to my grandmother of wanting to do things like being a nurse, or I didn't say I wanted to be a teacher. I said I wanted to be in charge of the bank. So she had taken me to the bank as a kid. So I thought, why can't I be in charge of the bank? And she said to me, don't ever be afraid of your ambition. Everyone else around you will try to pull you down based on your ambition, but you should not be afraid of it. And I think irrespective of what those intersectionalities are that I face, I remind myself of that always. I remind myself of the fact that there are thousands and thousands of young girls that are looking at us every single day. And what is that responsibility that I have on me to make sure that I don't seem afraid, that I don't seem beaten back, and I don't seem as though all of those intersectionalities and whatever perceptions are layered on top of me, that I believe them, because I don't. And I have to constantly remind myself to project that. So irrespective of what the challenges are, I'm reminded by my great Grammy, who said, you know, keep on pushing, do not be afraid of that ambition. And I'm reminding myself of that daily.
So I think I wanted to relay a story from when I was working on the peace process in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I was employed by the former president of Botswana to be the head of research on that peace process. And it was one of the greatest learning experiences of my life. I remember though, I was in my late 20s. I had come from New York working at the UN, and I then took up this role, and I was one of only a few women who would be in any position where you're providing analysis or impacts into the process of the peace process. And at that time, I really wanted to go on a couple of the initial trips that were into the Democratic Republic of Congo with the delegation. But I was told by an ambassador who was over 80 at that time. He said to me, "Now, Shelley, this is not a situation that a young woman like yourself should go into." And I remember looking at him and thinking, you're this dear old man, but do you realize that I have just been studying and writing about genocide in Rwanda for the last 5 years of my life? And so going into the Congo, there's not many things that I haven't read about. Now it's time for me to see it. But I didn't say that to him at the time. I just said, okay. And so then I said in my head, right, I need to make myself so valuable to them that they wouldn't want to go on a trip without me in future, which was what my goal was. And so from there on, I was writing briefs and providing analysis to the point where the former president would do just that. He would be like, "Where is Shelley?" every time he was in a meeting, and he could be at the front of a room with all of the rebel groups and the government leaders, and I could hear him turn around and say, "Where is Shelley? She needs to be right here behind me." And that's the kind of attitude that I really believe is something that helped to drive me forward in every other area of my career, was to not accept that somebody should tell me I don't belong, but instead to prove to them that, in fact, I did belong there. So, yeah.
Great story. Well, we are living through a pandemic, and one of the questions Christine came up with, which I think is a very good one, is how does this affect how you try and do your job these days? Those of you who have people in other countries, do we want to keep with the same order?
Sure, sounds good, Valerie. Yeah, I think that more than ever, I think your team, you need to be there for your team, not just for the pressures of work, but more importantly for the support that you should be giving to your colleagues emotionally, and to make them know that you're there for them in every way, shape, and form. I think, that's what Nicole's just alluded to. I think she sounds like she could be a psychologist now, and that to me is a sign of a true leader, is that you, first and foremost, you care about your team. I think that's incredibly important. I think being genuine in anything I've ever done, I think part of the reason why I think I still have such deep bonds with so many people from the times of the different offices that I worked in, is I think they really felt that I brought my heart to the job. And I think now more than ever, this is where we need to be, is bringing our heart to the job. The other thing, the other part I would say is creativity. I think that we need to be creative. We need to, and in a funny way, I think it's empowering to be creative right now. I think sometimes we feel stuck talking on these Zoom calls, but I think on the sidelines amongst our teams, I had my boss, Sarah Kudalakos, say to me, "Laura, I love your creativity. Can you come up with some ideas?" And I was like, oh, it just kind of got me out of this. What I suspect with some of your teams, Shelley, Nicole, maybe, is a sense of helplessness sometimes, especially amongst the younger crowd. And as we know, this is an unprecedented time. There's no playbook on this one. I have to say, honestly, like, I've been in this job for just over a year, and I'm just so impressed with my great team. And with all the stakeholders around Nova Scotia and the Atlantic, all the provinces have been so supportive. I've loved every minute so far of meeting everyone. But I think, what I've really noticed is, this team the team of mine that I work with are working closely across so many time zones. But the camaraderie and the teamwork and the ethic has been absolutely inspirational. And just quickly, I will go a little bit deeper into my boss, Sarah Kudalakos, who is our executive director. Some of you may know her. She's quite an impressive woman on her own right. She has done an incredible job leading our team through this pandemic. She's not only been super supportive, fully appreciating the unique pressures and circumstances that we've all been facing as a team. And I'll say on a personal note, this past year, my father, who is living in a long-term care home in Kitchener, as you know, my hometown, one where unfortunately there was significant loss of life. He was diagnosed with COVID-19 just about a year ago. It was a devastating time, knowing the facility was on lockdown and I had no way of seeing him in person. In those difficult days, not knowing how serious this could be for my dad, Sarah took the time to check in with me and offer full support. Luckily, my dad recovered, but I'll never forget the support she offered in my most crucial time of need. I found in all these intense jobs, as we've all been talking about, and I'd say a lot of crisis communications jobs that I've done, you tend to get real close to your team. And it's been my experience that these bonds do last a lifetime. So there is some real benefit to the stresses that we go through over the course of your life. At the end of it all, wow, you really have some incredible memories and some friendships.
Nicole?
So first of all, I just want to say, Laura, I'm so glad to hear that your dad is okay. You know, you had her heart in her hands there for a little bit, thinking it might have been a sad story. So thankfully, it was not. I'm happy to hear that. So from my perspective, how do I lead the organization through the pandemic? I had the fortunate and unfortunate circumstance of starting just before the pandemic. So I started in January of 2020, and I was all, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, looking forward to making a lot of really deep changes within the organization, which has always been a fantastic organization, but having spent so much of my career in the international global context, there's a lot that I had planned. Like everyone else, all my plans went out of the window. And I think what I really leveraged very heavily in terms of my ability to lead was really just embracing change, just understanding that nothing that I had was written in stone, and it was an opportunity to, as Laura said, just stay and remain creative and just do lots of interesting things. And I think one of the things that I really remain really proud of is just how extensive our supports have been, you know, at the provincial level to actually help international students, because there was a lot that international students were going through, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone was unsure as to what to do. And it really was by embracing change and being flexible and trying to learn from what are some of the experiences that other jurisdictions were doing, that actually really helped in terms of my own understanding as to how to lead an organization through a pandemic. I think one of the things that I had to learn very, very quickly also was trusting my people, trusting my team, because for me, like I said, I started in January, and you know, just imagine how soon after I would have had a scenario where all my team went remote and I was the only person that was in the office. So really reminding myself that these are professional people that are here. We all are part of the organization because we're part of that broader goal, just really trusting them right off the bat, and really deepening those trusts by continuing to support them. As I said, I'm really excited about how deep bonds have been formed with my team because of the fact that I feel as though the trust has not only been from their end to me, but it's also been from my end to them as well. So it's helped us to really have a cohesive, engaged relationship. And I also think there's two other bits that I want to share. I think leveraging personal empathy. I have always prided myself as a leader in terms of really being comfortable within that space of empathy. And I think it really helped me in this middle of getting into the pandemic and leading an organization, because it's not something that I had to quickly build up. It's something that was really part of my mainframe. So I was able to really leverage it very quickly and really help to support my team And also to say to them sometimes when it is that I could not, was something outside of my control, just being honest and open to say, this is not something I can fix, but I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to be there, and just really supporting them throughout the entire process, and doing so every day. So we're in contact much more, I think, than we would have been had it not been for the pandemic. So it's helped to accelerate those relationships. And I think a big one for me is also remembering to take time for yourself. I think there's a lot of us as leaders that very quickly get to the point where you allow yourself to get really burnt out because you want to be there, you want to help as much as possible. And I certainly did that within the first few months of this in terms of not reminding myself to take time. So I've really started to, again, step back and remind myself in terms of what are those things that are within my control, and also reminding myself to take time for myself, because I cannot be good for anyone unless I'm good for myself. So that's sort of like how I have been managing to lead the organization through the pandemic, and also make sure that I look at the bottom line and make sure we don't lose any money. That's the big one always.
Thank you, everybody. So a lot of great points raised. Actually, it's so interesting, Laura, because at the start of the pandemic, my father also was hospitalized, not in a long-term care home, but had returned from a trip to Mexico and ended up being hospitalized. And I remember at the time, my sister and I thought, is he going to be the first COVID case in Nova Scotia? He wasn't, but he's also recovered, but it was very scary. And that happened at exactly the same time that I was having to make huge decisions about bringing staff back from Juba and Kigali, and a lot of pressure on what is the right decision to make. And so we made what I believe were the right decisions at that time, and as the borders kept closing, etc. So that's one element. And then I think the other thing is that the point about trusting people that was raised by Nicole, absolutely trusting your staff, but also we had to trust in our local staff and the local ownership, and be willing to say, you know what, this may not be the way we would normally do this kind of program, but what the hell, because everybody is changing the way that they're doing things right now. So let's do this. And at that time of, the Black Lives Matter movement happening, as well as understanding COVID, it was so powerful to be able to do better in terms of thinking about how to empower our local communities and stakeholders in a way that we had remarkable results. I am so proud of the staff that I have in the way that they pulled together to do things innovatively, training security forces in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, doing things from a remote area here to help with local trainers there to continue that work, making sure that new ways like radio programs were happening, so we innovated through getting our information out through different means, and all of those types of things are really important. I just wanted to lastly say that that whole idea of being creative and innovative, I can remember early on at the time, I told my staff, we will see who is within our group that has the ability to be innovative, and that no idea is crazy right now. So come forward with it and be willing to be bold. And certainly, I think that it paid off a lot in terms of us being able to maintain all of the staff. I'm really grateful I didn't have to let go of anyone because of the pandemic. I've got a lot of friends who are in positions where it's the first couple of months of the pandemic, that's what they spent doing, and that's extremely stressful. There's a lot of responsibility there too in terms of what are you doing to families and communities. So yeah, so those are a highlight of some of the things that we managed to keep going and how we changed a little bit in terms of our approaches.
Great. Well, I was going to ask for general advice, but I think you've all been providing great advice as this has gone on and have built on each other's comments. So it's wonderful. We do have one question from a participant, and she's saying she's recently entered a new industry and she's trying to learn, but how does she switch to a more dominant presence once she's gained her confidence? And she says, does that come naturally? Does anyone want to answer that one? And I think we should wrap up pretty soon.
So if, okay, I'll probably just jump in. I think it's important to this person that's listening to understand that just because of the fact that you see Valerie and Shelley and Laura and myself here does not necessarily mean that we are always confident. It's something that you have got to work at every single day, because sometimes, you know, we can have really interesting little things that cause us to have issues around imposter syndrome. And you might feel that way going into a room, but keep in mind, there are many, many other people that are in the room that are probably processing this in the same way that you are. I have often said to people that I mentor, just find someone within the organization that can actually act as a support person for you. And if you don't find that person within the organization, find someone in the outside of the organization that you can speak to and just get their advice and their insights in terms of how you should position yourself regarding whatever the issue is that you are, you know, the room that you want to walk into. But I think it's often a good idea to show up as your whole self, because if you go into a room and you're showing up where you're assuming that they want to see you show up in a certain way, it would obviously affect your confidence, because you're going in already with a preconceived notion that someone has of what you should be showing up as. And don't forget that, you know, those poses that we can do can also help us with our confidence. The self-affirmations that we do can help us with our confidence. And interestingly enough, I'm not ashamed to say this, almost every time I go into something major, I have to do my Wonder Woman pose. I have to stand with my arms at my waist and really remind myself that I can actually do this, because it affects your confidence. And if it is that you feel that way and you internalize it, when you go into a room, you can be a lot more bold. You can be a lot more willing to actually take a seat at that table, and in some cases actually create that table for yourself.
Great ideas. Christine has reminded me that we have a poll for our participants, basically suggesting some other topics that might be of interest. And if participants can respond, we would appreciate, and we will consider that input for future events. We are getting to, we've been discussing for about an hour. As I say, I think you've done a wonderful job of building on each other's comments and providing great advice for any of us, whether we're young or old. I also would like to thank Christine and Tanya Lush and Kevin DeVoe and Courtney Heisler. I think I remembered everybody who had a role in putting this together. It's been great talking to you. I think it's been a great way to celebrate International Women's Day. Does anybody want to have any final remarks?
Well, if I can just jump in, Valerie, I just want to say what a pleasure this has been. And I echo what you just said, Valerie. I've learned so much. And it's actually been a bit of a therapy session for me in some ways, listening to Shelley and Nicole's stories. And Valerie, you've been a wonderful moderator. And a shout out to your team and Christine Young, who ultimately invited me on this panel. Thank you so much. I'll be as supportive as I can. If you decide to do more women's issues, I'm your biggest supporter.
Great.
Thank you.
Are we done, or does anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. I love this kind of a format where we can exchange as opposed to formal presentations. So wonderful way to do this today. And absolutely let us know if we can help support your work moving forward. I've got a lot of great staff members that have a lot of interesting experiences to share that I'm sure would be excellent for you to engage with also. Thank you.
Okay,
To everyone as well.
I think we're done. Thanks very much. Good night. Happy International Women's